Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the EIV webinar on capturing powerful volunteering impact stories with Studio Subu. I'm very excited to have Studio Subu on board because I've heard so much about their work. And while I was prepping for this session, I was very excited for the solutions and for the frameworks that they share around communications. Meghna, we have Meghna here, who is the partner, CEO, and strategic partner. While I was creating her poster, I was very excited because the title is a 3-line title, which took up a very nice space in my poster. So, and I wanted to make it a nice poster because what's the point if you're doing a session with communications and your poster looks pakwas? So I'll stop blabbering now. I'll give it on to Meghna to take the session ahead. She'll talk. Hello? Sorry, I don't know who's speaking. Yes. Sorry. Please keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question. Meghna will be speaking for 20-25 minutes, sharing a framework, sharing a structure, and how can you effectively communicate about your volunteering stories. And then she'll open up for Q&As. Please note down any questions that you may have. We'll share the deck with you. We'll share the recording with you. And please ask as many questions as you have. Over to you, Meghna. Thank you so much. Very, very excited. All right.
Thank you, Megha. Thank you so much for having me on here and everybody for joining. Before I start, I would really, really love to see, for all of those who can, I know internet is always an issue, to please put your video camera on. I personally much prefer having conversations and sessions, etc., in person, but Zoom is the next best thing. But it would just really help if I can see your face, so that I know I'm talking to people and not to devices. That would be really lovely. So,
or just me.
Sorry?
Just me. Because...
Yes, or just to Megha, who I've already spoken to. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Lovely. I'm just going to share my screen now as well. Give me 1 second. Can everybody see it? Thumbs up? Okay.
Yes, I can see.
Lovely. So this is, I am especially excited for today's session because we've done so many sessions, and as a studio, we have worked with so many organizations in trying to really help organizations leverage the power of communications, and particularly storytelling, to be able to tell their story well. Our mission as a studio at Studio Subu has been, can organizations leverage comms to be able to drive further impact in their own organization? So you have your own fundraising goals, I'm sure you have recruitment goals, volunteer recruitment goals, team recruitment goals, partnership goals, etc. And comms needs to play a really important role in being able to achieve those goals. And obviously, one of the best ways of doing that, because you're involving people in these actions, is to tell your story well. So I think it's very, very important that we at least get this piece right. And I've been in the sector for half of my career now, which has been the last about 12 years in the sector, where we know that we are strapped with resources, we're strapped with money, and we cannot just carpet bomb everything. We need to be really mindful of every single piece of communication that goes out there. So I'm hoping that this framework that I share with you today will at least guide you in a direction that gives you the confidence to say it's not that hard, it's not that daunting, and it's really important to be able to start creating these stories for us, for the organization. Now, when we look at impact, typically there are two sides to impact that all of you are very well aware of already. I don't need to go into it in too much detail, but just a summary is there is the quantitative side of impact and there's the qualitative side of impact. Now, the quantitative side is what you all have always been doing as an organization at whatever level. I mean, there are some orgs that are really, really passionate about being data driven and collecting a lot of data on the ground and in the field. And there are some that don't do so much of that, but they have some amount of it. There is a collection aspect of that quantitative data, which then the challenge becomes, how do I convert that information that I've collected in the field to make it relatable for my audience? Because you may have collected a lot of data, but you have to make sense of it. You have to sift out the extra, and you have to present it in a way that makes sense. And then there is the second part, which is the qualitative angle, which is what this session is going to be about, which is how can I bring the world of my work to my audience? How can I bring the location, the situation, the areas of my work to somebody through impactful storytelling? And that's really where qualitative impact stories are the most useful. So this session is going to focus on the qualitative part. I'm happy to answer any questions on the quantitative part later on if we have any time left. Yeah. So the first thing that we really need to think about when we're looking at volunteering impact stories, particularly aside from our regular impact stories, is who is our audience? Now, this is really important for us to stop and think about, because typically when an org is putting their impact stories together, it could be stories of children in the classroom. It could be stories of women in their entrepreneurial setups. It could be stories of communities in housing or in water, whatever it is that your area of work is. But those are very focused on the community and the impact that's happening in the community. But in this particular case, when we want to also showcase and highlight our volunteers and what's the impact that our volunteers are driving, and what's the role that the volunteers are playing in our whole model, we need to think of through who is it that we are trying to talk to for these particular stories. In my mind, and there are varied levels, because we talk to so many people. We talk to government bodies, we talk to partners, funders, potential volunteers, potential hires, etc. But I think the two main audiences really that come into play when we're looking at volunteering impact are funders and potential volunteers, because those are the two biggest challenges that I'm assuming a large part of you sort of are trying to grapple with. So when it comes to funders, the question that typically funders have is this worth my investment? Now, why is this a question that is unique to your organizations, which are heavily dependent on volunteering versus other NGOs in the sector? I think this question is particularly important because where they are coming from, even if they are regular funders of the social sector in general, they need to be convinced about the volunteering model. And that's what you're really trying to bring across to them. So you need to really push a few of these pointers out to them. What's the credibility of this model? How does the model work? What are the details of that? Because the questions instinctively are, where is your pipeline of volunteers coming from? How is this sustainable? How do you generate interest? What are the numbers? What's the kind of scale you're looking at with these? These are typical questions that are quite unique to your probably set of funders versus funders in the overall sector. And the reason I'm bringing this out is because when we're going through the framework of structuring our stories and our impact narratives, we need to keep these pointers in mind, because we have to answer these questions when we're going into the structuring of that. The other part, the second audience are volunteers, or rather I would say potential volunteers. Now, I'm sure a large part of this room have been volunteers at some point before you have been either part of the organization or otherwise. And typically, if you were to put yourself in your own shoes back, rewinding a little bit, or in the shoes of your volunteers, you would say that the big question that we have seen when we have worked with such organizations has been, especially from the angle of recruitment, is this for me? And there are two aspects to this. There is the things that resonate. Why would I want to do this? Because I would feel, I want to do something that makes me feel good. I'll feel proud of what I am doing. There is a sense of belonging which has come out in our experience as quite a high pointer when it comes to volunteer recruitment, where it's like I'm part of this group of a larger mission. I'm part of a movement. I'm part of a cohort of something. And that's come out pretty strong when we have worked with organizations who have a volunteering model. The next one is social recognition, which some people feel is a bit awkward to highlight because you don't want this to be an external thing. You want it to essentially be coming from your heart and coming from a place of doing good. But then we underplay the importance of this in our communication and in our external recruitment. But social recognition is actually a really powerful piece of resonance for this audience, because they want to be able to show to their friends, to their network, to their ecosystem what they are doing. A lot of organizations have used social media, photographs, frames, badges, all of those things to show, to help volunteers sort of show their work in this area. And then the last piece that really I think resonates with volunteers is empathy. So I'm in a place of privilege, but I feel for the children who can't go to school, or I feel for the families that don't have access to healthcare. So there is that which is slightly different from doing good. Doing good is just me feeling like I'm doing something good, but this empathy is actually being able to connect to the cause. So that specific cause that will resonate with somebody, be like, I really want this problem to be solved. These are the things that you will tap into as the hooks in your impact story. So whenever you're putting a story together, tug at these strings as much as you can, but don't ignore the barriers to entry. So there are some very typical barriers to entry, which is, how much time of mine is this going to take? I'm not sure if I have that kind of time. I'm not sure if I can make a commitment upfront for the next 3 months or the next 6 months. That's a little daunting to me. Is there a responsibility that I'm going to be taking? Do I even have the skill to do this? If I'm supposed to be a mentor to somebody, do I have the skill to really sit with a child or with a young adult to be able to talk through some of their challenges? Will I be able to connect with them? I am from such a different background. I am from such a different upbringing. Will they even be able to connect with me? Will I be able to connect with them? Language is, a very obviously concern. I only speak English. How am I going to be able to connect with people and volunteer? And then also sometimes the setting. If I'm a girl, or if I'm a woman, is that setting where I'm going to be going to build houses, for example? Is that safe for me? Can I go alone? Am I going to be able to visit this place easily? Is it accessible to me? So these are barriers that people have in their minds, even though they have this sense of wanting to do something and wanting to do good. And it's our job, through our stories and through our communication, to be able to not only tap into the good, but also to be able to, with as much clarity and confidence, answer the barriers. The more clarity we have, even in our stories, the stronger the connect is going to be. I'm sure there are more than these, and I'd be happy to hear from the group. Please share in the chat box if you feel like there are other either points that resonate really well that the team should be looking at, or barriers to entry that you have come across when you've tried to communicate. It'll be really helpful for the group. These are some that I've put together, and we'll be sharing this deck with you as well, so you will have access to it. But it would be really lovely, as we go along, to hear from you if there are more things to this, because I'm sure there are, and all of you have a lot more experience in this work, particularly, than even I do. Yeah. So keeping the audience in mind. So step number one, keep this audience in mind whenever you're framing your story. So we never write a story just for the sake of writing a story. We're always writing a story for a reason and to a particular audience. Now, sometimes that story can be relevant to both your funder and your volunteer, which is great. But when you're writing it, I think it's really important that you keep in mind a particular audience, and I'll explain to you why in the structure as we go along. So we've got our audience. So how do you now create this story? Because we've got so many different components that we want to capture. I'm going to give you a really simple acronym to make you be able to make that shift from a story to an impactful story. Yeah, so we're going to start with the first piece, which is the S of the shift, which is the scenario. Now, what this really is when you're looking to talk to either a funder or a volunteer or a partner, you cannot assume that people will understand where you're coming from. You've been in this work day in and day out, but others have not. The external audience has not. So you need to be able to paint a picture to explain what is it that we're talking about. Are we talking about a school in an underprivileged area? Are we talking, as descriptive as you can get? Like, what is that? What is the scenario? What is the challenge that you as an organization is trying to address? And carve that whole thing out in a few sentences. So there is that whole piece of scenario setting or background or context setting. The second part to this is the H, which is how do we do it, which is essentially your model. Now here, we're not asking you to specifically, right, there is a difference here, which is this is not the model of the program or the organization as a whole, but it is the volunteering model. How does this work? How does your intervention play out in this scenario? It's really important that you be able to articulate that again in a few sentences. And then what does it really involve? And what does it involve is from the perspective of the volunteer. So what does that really mean? Does the volunteer come in once a week, once a month, once a quarter? What is the time commitment? These are answering a lot of the barrier questions. What is the commitment? What is the expectation? What is the role? What is the place that they have in this whole story? And really, what's the shift that they are going to be able to make in the scenario? And then there is, of course, the most important part of a story, which is the feel, which is as a result of this model and as a result of the role of this volunteer, how am I going to make you feel? So what's going to be that shift? What's going to be the impact on the ground when this program is running well? If the program is running successfully, what's going to come out of it? And then finally, and this is the most important, I feel, because we often, when we're writing stories, we forget about the call to action, because we always think call to action should come in in an application form or in a donate campaign, etc. But we say a story is a story, it should be independent. But that is not the case at all. In fact, I don't think personally any communication ever should go out in any format, short or small, without a call to action. It can be just one simple line at the end, but there needs to be a call to action, because if a person has taken the time, whether it's 1 minute or 7 minutes, to go through an entire experience with you, don't leave them hanging. And it's not for your sake to have the call to action. I mean, of course, it's great for you because you do want somebody to act on it, but it's actually more from the audience's place. Like, okay, you've taken me through all of this, and then so now what? What do you want me to do? And that do doesn't have to be sign up, because that is the highest level of call to action. But the do could literally be learn more, and give a link to your site, or give a link to your uh, to your team, an email to your team. It could be share about us. It could be comment, like what are your thoughts? What do you think? It could be anything, but always close every piece of communication, including impact stories, with a tangible call to action. That would be your structure. Now, here's where the audience comes in. With me so far, thumbs up. A lot of faces are out. So, okay, I can see a few thumbs. Awesome. Now, here's the fun part. So we've got a structure. Yeah, so we know we have to write about the scenario, and these are important pieces that you need to collect with your story. You know, you've got to collect information to create a scenario. You know, you need to describe your model. You know, you need to talk about what the actual involvement of the volunteer is. You know, you need to write the impact on the field part, and then that call to action. You've got these 5 pieces. Now, I want you to look at these 5 pieces not as a linear storyline, because this is writing it as SHIFT is one way of writing a story. But treat each of these acronyms as Lego blocks. How many of you play with Lego or have played ever with Lego? Lego is my absolute favorite go-to thing for everything. Sometimes when I'm stuck with a problem, this is a side note, I often end up playing with Lego, and it makes my head clear up and gives me incredible ideas. So if you've ever stuck with anything, get your hands on a small piece of Lego and magic will happen. Sorry, diversion. So treat these I know somebody's raised a hand, but I'll just complete this section and then we'll take those questions. Yeah. Treat each of these pieces as individual Lego blocks, which you can then mix and match according to your scenario and your audience. So if you are talking to a funder, for example, what are the key things that they are going to be interested in? Likely it will be the S and the H. What are we talking about? What's the challenge? How are you trying to solve it? What's this model? Is this a viable model that's going to try to solve it? If it makes sense to me, theek hai, I'll back it. Thoda bahut, like the field part has to come in because you need to make that connect. But essentially, you need to know the S and the H, and you need to highlight that piece a little bit more. When it comes, however, to writing an impact story for recruitment, you can shift these blocks around and actually start with perhaps the F and the I. So you start out with a feeler that, hey, this is what's going to happen, which is the resonate points that we went through in the volunteering, the volunteer audience piece, all those pieces that resonates. You start out with a feeler, go into the I directly. This is what your role is going to be. And then if you have space and if you have time, you can also go into the how this model overall works, or you can learn more about our model and connect it to them in that aspect, right? So every time you're putting a story together, you need to have these pieces, have these blocks, but shift them around according to who your audience is and how much time you have. So 2 things that will require you to think through, how am I putting this together? Who's my audience? And how much time do I have? If I have a 1-hour presentation with a funder, I can aram se go through all 5 in that hour and give each one equal importance. Although depending on who the funder is, if the funder is an individual funder who goes more by feel, then bump up the feel one first and put the rest niche. If it's a CSR funder who is looking at predominantly scale and how you're doing it, bump up the model and then put that. So that shift can happen, but you can aram se do all 5. But if you have a 5-minute phone call with a funder or a 5-minute phone call with a potential volunteer for recruitment, just focus on maybe 1 or 2 of these, the F and the I, and then leave the rest to the follow-up. Yeah. So this would be what we consider the components of putting a really solid impact story together. I'm going to go on to the next section. Actually, before that, should I take questions at the end, Megha? Or
Up to you. You can also show some examples if you think we
yeah.
can look at them now and then move to this section.
Okay, so let me just complete this quick last section. So there is an aspect of creating that story where the shift came in, but there is also a really important element which I just wanted to spend 5 minutes on with this group, which is on how do we essentially capture this, because the story is only as good as what we capture. And oftentimes we try to just grab information wherever we can and struggle with putting something together, or run to a volunteer and say, can you just tell me like a quick 5 minutes, can you just summarize what you're doing so that I can put it into a story and dump it on my recruitment campaign. So I think there needs to be some thought put into how do you capture your stories as well. And you need to be well prepared for the capturing part of it if you want to see success in the creating part of it. And there are a few sort of axioms that we really follow, even at the studio, which I would want to share with you, which makes that capturing really authentic. And the first one here is honest, where you need to be honest both to your audience, and you need to be honest with the people who are capturing. So if it is volunteer stories that you're capturing from volunteers, tell them what you're doing this for. Don't just ask them to give you something. Tell them why you need it. Tell them I need it for this particular proposal that I'm sending out, or I need it because I need to put a campaign together and I'm struggling with this aspect to be able to connect. That honesty will help them give you the right information, because then they'll become your allies and they'll give you the right stuff rather than you just painstakingly digging out the information. And this goes, by the way, not just to if you're trying to go to a volunteer to capture a story, but even if you're going in the field and capturing the story at the end level, at the community level. Be empathetic to their scenario. Try to understand where they're coming from, rather than being a news journalist who's going in there and just trying to sweep up a bunch of facts and information, because that's not going to work for your purpose. It'll work for your news story, but it's not going to get you the kind of emotion you want from this objective that you have. Be very respectful of their time. Don't like go in there saying, I need 10 minutes of your time, and then take 45 minutes. That's just not fair. And you need to be respectful of their time. You need to be respectful of their situation. So there are so many times where we've gone into the field to capture stories, and it took a good 45 minutes for us to just warm up to the women in the community that we went in, because they were very shy and apprehensive about sharing. And it was only after we made it comfortable that I was like, okay, now can I ask you questions? So you need to be able to sometimes give it that time and respect, and know that people are not just at your beck and call to do some of this. And the last point is just be optimistic. That whole era of pitiful stories has come and gone. And this is something that I strongly believe in. While it is very easy to find a story that is just so sad and pathetic that you're like, I have to capture this because people will feel really bad and will want to be a part of it. Wrong. That tactic does not work anymore. And I would really strongly encourage everybody to move away from that. And rather than that, have a very optimistic angle to the stories. So even, yes, we work in some hard times. We work with some very harsh realities. But the whole reason why we exist and our program exists is because we want to make things better. So bring in that hope, bringing that optimism in all of your stories when you're doing it. So these are just some things to keep in mind. The hero your stories with these things, with these 4 things, and it will really make your story a hero if you're able to keep these pointers in mind. And the last thing really is a set of tips, literally a set of tips when you're capturing. Be super transparent. Sometimes you can actually be unstructured in your storytelling. Our best stories in the field as a studio, when we've gone, we have actually carved out the time to sit and just spend time. Now, this is not possible with everyone, and everyone's got busy jobs and everything. So I know this is a good to have. Typically, we go in with a very structured interview set of questions and say, please answer these 5 questions. And then we put a story together with those 5 questions. But the best stories come in when you go unstructured. Spend a day with the person or the people that you're with. And the stuff that you'll get through just observation, which we call ethnographic story capturing, is just the most powerful and the most beautiful. So see if you can carve time in advance to be able to do something like that. Build a real connection with people, and they will give you the gems that you need. Don't go in there from a me versus you. I'm going to capture you. Be a team, be together in this. Get people involved in your story, or as though they are storytelling with you. Be a chameleon. This is like a silly point, but it's an important point that I always bring, because every time I go with, and we've done inductions, new team inductions, where we've taken people to the field, and oftentimes we've had to almost literally call out and say, you're going into an environment that's probably sometimes not yours. Don't wear your Armani cap and walk in. That's just not going to work. So try and blend in as much as you can, because the more you blend in, the more you will be able to get that authenticity. Essentially, all we're looking for is authenticity in a story. And if you've got that, then all of the other parts come very, very beautifully. The second last point is capture at least 2x of what you're going to put together. If you think you've got enough exactly to write your story, you've not got enough. You need to have 2 times. I would say sometimes if you're doing video capturing, it should be 4 times the footage of what you're actually going to be using, so that there's room to play around with that. And then the last point is, it's not just about when you go in there and capture. It is also about a pre and a post prep to be able to capture a good story. Before you go in, let's say you're going to capture the story of Lakshmi, who is a volunteer, who's been a volunteer for your team for a long time. Read up everything about her. Where is she from? Where does she work? What does she do? What has she done? Where has she volunteered? What has been her past? So that when you're going in, you're not starting from scratch. You're not wasting time trying to figure out who she is in the first place. So do a little bit of that prep research. It's very important to make that connection then when you're on the ground. And then the final point, which has been in my experience, I have worked with over 150 NGOs to date. I would say 97% of these NGOs fail at this last point, which is archiving. I don't know why, but it has been a really big struggle where we somehow managed to get photos, we managed to get stories, and we put it together for that one particular report or that one particular document that we needed the story for. And we put it in there and it works great, but then we haven't labeled it. We haven't said when we've done it. We haven't put it in a folder that's been accessible for everybody else. So we will never, ever in our lives be able to use that story again, because 2 months later, when you come back to that, you'll have forgotten who the person's name is, where this was, when it was taken, and what it was used for. And that's a real tragedy. So I think it's really important as a team for somebody to take ownership of this, and you all can decide who it is. Somebody needs to take ownership and say, I'm going to create a folder that my entire organization, not my comms team, not my leadership team, but my entire organization has access to. And I need to, every single time I've collected us and created a story, label it in a way that somebody else from your team who's putting a deck together can just go in that folder and choose what they want, pick up that story, pick up the photo that's linked to the story, and then run with it. Really, really important for us to be able to do that. That's it. I'm going to also share a little bit of examples of where and how we can showcase impact. So, when I'm talking about capturing stories, they could be captured in video format, they could be captured in story format, they could be used for social media, they can be used for reports. Here are just a few examples of ways in which you can incorporate stories. Here is a report that we had built for Dasra in one of their projects that they had done in Jharkhand. And while you have the whole report, and typically you will all have annual reports, etc., the stories can really come in beautifully in the middle of these reports to give you a breather from all that heavy content. So sometimes you can put stories like here, the way on the right, we've put it in a box that calls it out with illustrations, or you can even put stories here. There is one place like, one second. Where did it go? There was one place where it was like a testimonial here. So if you see on the left, Rafat Farzana, this is actually a quote, but it sort of heroes out her voice and her story as well. So you can intersperse reports with stories. Here is an example of an internal document that we did for Forbes Marshall, where we wanted the internal teams to really know about the things that FM does beyond business. And while we've explained all of these things, this is a work in progress document. So while we've explained all the work that we've done as CSR, we've put in a breather page like this. So here is a story of Asha, Kanta, and Shobha. We've put a picture of them and then just this little box. So in the middle of all of these white pages of information, you pop in a story and it really brings that page. It really brings that page to life. Another example that one last example that I can show you is here. If you see this website, this is again back to the Dasra website. Here is a microsite which has really taken somebody through the project. So this is almost like an impact microsite of the project that Dasra had done. So we've taken them through all of these pieces, but then you plug in your video story somewhere in the middle, or you put in these little boxes. So the way we've done it, the storytelling here is you either click on these boxes, which open up into stories, or you look at these testimonials. So this is a photo of Shilpa, and we've just got her testimonial here, which can then click into the larger story. So it again depends on how much space you have, what your sort of objective is for all of these. But there are really different ways in which you can bring in these stories, both from all of your audience point of views. But my hope is that at least you've got some sort of structure to run with and some sort of play in knowing how to pack and organize your stories based on the audience and the time and the format that you have. That is it from my end. I'm going to pause here now to open it up for questions, for comments, for anything.
Hi, Meghna.
Hi, who is this talking? I don't see any faces.
This is Purna from Navodaya Foundation.
Yes, hi Purna.
Yeah, Meghna, I have going through your all the template, all those things right now. So it's really because the communication is one of the key bottleneck for the while we're preparing the reports, impact stories, and those things. Sometimes what happens, we focus on the photos, drafts, and videos. So the photos and the videos are sufficient, mandate you how we have worked with the that communities, what kinds of communities before our intervention. All those things we have written out in the reports. I have today I get in depth about the how can we design the reports on the success reports, all of things. So just I need to thank you that some kinds of insight I had get today to how to ratificate the reports to success stories and those impact stories.
Thank you, Punna. I appreciate that. And just to let you know that even for your video, you can use this same structure, because we go in oftentimes with videos with video scripts. But even those video scripts need to have all of these components.
Yeah.
Because you have only 5 minutes. Nobody's going to watch more than, I think, max you can do if you want to do if you think you are really skilled at doing a inspiring video, max somebody will watch for 6 minutes. Ideally it should be 1 or 2 minutes to capture chotu motu things, but the role of video is to actually get people interested, and then there should be a follow-up to a more detailed information. Oftentimes people rely on video to give you the full story, but that's very difficult to do in 1 or 2 minutes. So the role of video is slightly different from storytelling in the format that I've shared.
Yes.
Thanks, Punna. Thanks, Meghna. Thanks, Meghna. This was lovely. I have a tons of question that I have taken a note of. I'm sorry, there's background noise at my end. But one question. Sorry.
There's a question on the chat box, Meghna, by Deepak. What type of consent is recommended before sharing photos and videos publicly?
Yes, that's a really, really important question. Thank you, Deepak, for bringing that up. We have had so many long conversations about the ethics of storytelling. I can honestly do an entire session, Deepak, on this, because it's very, very important. The consent is largely dependent on the organization that's going in the field. So even if you've got an external videographer, photographer, the consent responsibility is yours. So you must always take that responsibility. That's number A. The way that typically we do, ideal format of consent is obviously take a chotu sa form. I can share an example of a form with you, Megha, to share out to this group. Simple form with like 1 or 2, like a 2-3 sentence form with a checkbox saying I consent. Now that is sometimes difficult to do, right? Because when you're in the ground, how will you be able to? That's easy to do with your volunteers. So you can always give your volunteers that, but it's slightly difficult to do when you're on ground and there are so many people that you're capturing. What we do as common practice at the studio for ourselves is whenever we're going in, we do not write, take notes or film anything until we have just verbally even asked people, can I take notes for this? Now, before we start recording anything, whether it's our own notes or asking questions or filming, we actually spend some time just getting to know that person. So you can't just show up and say, Acha, I have 5 questions, can you please answer? They'll get little thoda sa, okay, uncomfortable. Imagine if somebody just suddenly comes to your house, literally your house, because that's what we end up doing, comes to your house and say, I have 5 questions, can you please answer? Question number 1 is blah, blah, blah. It's going to be very awkward. So we go in there, we introduce ourselves, we tell them why we're here in the first place, we try to make a connection, and usi conversation mein that question of consent comes up. Is it okay if if I can just capture this, and this is why I'm capturing it? So that's all it's required, honestly, if you have that verbal consent. If you're doing actual photography, you can also say that I'll be using these photos. Are you comfortable with me using these photos for this particular reason? And I think it's really, really, really important that you stick to that. So if you're telling somebody, okay, I need to use these photos for a impact report that I'm creating for funders, stick to that promise. Don't suddenly use that photo for social media campaigning unless you've asked for that before. So I think that's the only thing I would say. So a simple form is ideal scenario, but if not, I think even verbal is fine, but that is still, somehow you'll need to get that verbal permission for sure. With children, what we sometimes do is we take permission from either parents or teachers.
Thanks, Meghna. So talking about social media campaigns, I also figured that a lot of times a lot of these NGO volunteering calls look very similar. Like you can't figure out if you remove the logo, you don't know. Everybody is bringing change. Everybody is asking you to come lead the change you want to see. How do you think people can? And even if you go to ChatGPT, they'll give you the same wordings that you can do, right?
Yeah.
How can people change that?
See, I'll tell you, Megha, this is a slightly controversial point of view, which I'll share. But honestly, I think trying to be unique now is too much. Because at the end of the day, you're not that unique. Your work is probably beautiful work. And I am genuinely inspired by every single organization that I have ever worked with. And I'm sure if I learn about all of you, I will be like double inspired. So I'm not undermining your work at all. But if you're trying to fight this battle of how do I make myself unique, you're really going to be at a loss and say, Arey, abhi main kya bolu, which is different. So instead of that, my recommendation is make it personal. So shift away from the old idea that we have of I have to be unique, I have to be unique, and try to convert that mindset on I have to be personal. Let me try and see if I can talk to my best friend. Assume that the audience that you're speaking to is your sister's best friend, your brother's best friend. How would you talk to them? You wouldn't go with that chat GPT wala marketing spiel. You would make it a lot more personal. You would make it a lot more like there's a human being behind what you're saying. That's, I think, the only tip that I would give you. Then it's a matter of if a person connects with you personally, they will come in, they will buy into your idea. And if they don't, and if they want to go into somebody else's, that's also okay. I think there are enough volunteers out there to want to do that. But the focus should be, can I be authentic? Can I be personal? Can I try to connect at a human level with somebody? And that's why keeping that audience in mind and profiling that person in your head, researching about that person, the pre-research part will really help.
Right. Thanks so much. So my next question, I'm sorry, I have a list of questions. If you have questions, please put in the chat and I'll give them priority. I've also put a feedback form if you want to fill out and join the AIV WhatsApp group. So sometimes when we're doing corporate volunteering projects or one-time or short-term volunteering impacts, right, where we ask people to sign up, and if it is a physical activity, there are a lot more chances for them to give experience, record a boomerang, record a video sort of a thing. But how do you get like a deep insight? How do you ask them to share feedbacks, or how do you record that personal aspect? And I think it's even more difficult when that's happening virtually, like if it's a one-time virtual volunteering. And if the person is for like a 1 week or three sessions, 2 sessions, you may still be able to get a hold of them. But if it's a one-time thing only, how do you capture their essence?
Yeah, so there are multiple sub questions I think you've asked in this. So the virtual part is a tough one. I think the virtual part, the only way to do it would be through another virtual call, because and whatever you can gather from that. So it would be more of an interview style collection of the SHIFT. Where you will need to get that. But I think that could still be really powerful. And what you do with that could be really interesting. So it could end up being an impact story that is literally in interview format. I don't know if you all have read through all these trashy Bollywood magazines, but those interviews are really interesting if you put them in a nice format. That's a great form of storytelling, is just putting it in an interview format style, which is the most you can really do when you're not there to be able to capture that visually. But otherwise, the second one to your question, Megha, is short-term volunteering versus long-term volunteering impact. The long-term one is obviously the most useful if you've identified that this is a story that you want to capture in the long term from before. So then you can follow that journey, but you have to remember to have fixed intervals in which you're following that journey. That's going to give you the best out of that. The short-term walas, where it's like a week or so of those, what we have asked people to do in the past have been for the volunteers to actually capture their or journal their story themselves. And then we come in quickly and try to extract that for them. Because it's very difficult for a team, an organizational team. So it's very difficult for probably you to go across so many short-term volunteering interviews or stories. So then from the beginning itself, you set a precedent. You can do a short induction with the volunteering cohort to be like, hey, you know, we would love as part of this for you to just take your own pictures, you know, journal your own experiences and then share it with us at the end.
Yeah, and
The more systems you have in place, the easier it is going to be for you to keep refreshing your story bank.
Makes sense. Another question I had while we were talking about language as a barrier, right? So I know a lot of organizations who, in order to connect with people better, have tried to design their posters in vernacular languages. But I feel like even that has not worked for them. Like I remember an organization wanted to hire Punjabi speaking volunteers, and they thought maybe they should design their campaign or poster in Punjabi, so only people who can read it identify it. But I still feel like it doesn't work for a lot of audience then. So what is the middle ground for people to make sure that it is also relevant to other people so they can share it to people? Like anybody, like I know a lot of, I'm from Delhi, so I know a lot of Punjabi speaking people, but because I can't understand the poster, I can't share it further. And we know that people don't really read a lot of documents and they blindly apply to things. So although they were trying to be smart about it, is Meghna frozen or am I frozen? Sorry,
No,
I'm not sure.
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so the idea is how do you find a sweet spot between vernacular posters, languages, and sticking to English because it's more accessible to people?
I mean, I'm sure the group will actually have thoughts about this, given that you all are working in different regions. And I'll share my perspective, but I would love to actually open this question out to the group as well, Meghna, because I think they'll have a lot of insight. From my perspective, language in your communication material should not be used as a tactic, but it is used mainly when you want to get through to a certain community of people where that language will resonate with them. So if you are trying to get volunteers to come in who can speak, who are required to speak Hindi or who are required to speak Punjabi, then yes, you should use that because that's the language that you'll be running with. But if you're going to get volunteers who are going to come in to do something and work with the community in Hindi, but you're using Punjabi to rope them in, that doesn't really make sense. So that's just my perspective, but you all might have a lot more experience on the language piece. So I would like to actually pause there and, can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost you for a bit. I'm not sure if everybody else could hear it.
No, what I'm saying is I would love to actually open this question out to the group and see if anybody else has any thoughts on how they have tackled language. They might have better perspective. Anyone would like to help and share? Anybody uses different languages in their communication? And if you do, can you share a little bit of how you do that?
I could go ahead. So as mentioned, so we work with multiple clients on several events every day, which means that the depth of your impact is not at par with maybe organizations that work in depth, right? Now, here what we do is, for example, if we're doing something under the banner of diversity and inclusion, a key aspect there, at least for the blind, is Braille. Now, if a volunteer is going to create braille cards, we're going to first communicate in the language of the volunteer to rope them in.
Yeah.
And this is more from a place of access than from a place of tactics. So something like, if you can read this, please know someone cannot, and give a statistic that's hard hitting, right? But for the NGO partner, we're also looking at ensuring that what we are communicating is accessible by the program team in a language they understand, which might be English or Hindi, but more so that the target audience that this intended sort of card of motivation is reaching to does in actuality require it, and what is the target demographic we're looking at. Is this a specific age group? Are these school children? Are these youth being trained? So keeping that sort of context in mind, we make those edits and have that loaded into our system, which enables us to sort of ensure that we're sending the right communication out. So that's pretty much a practice we do.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I
Thank
could
you.
also add some inputs from Bhumi's perspective. So,
Yes, Neha, thanks.
so yeah, while like Megha was mentioning, so when we are recruiting volunteers, while we may be needing, Tamil speaking or Hindi speaking volunteers, but what works best is what we've concluded is having the posters in English, because we are while our audience would be speaking these local languages, but it is easy for them to share these posters among their networks, and when it is in English. Also, usually what we've observed is the age group of volunteers that we are targeting, they may be knowing the local language, but they are more conversant in English. So for communication purpose, English works well on posters and creatives, and on social media also. Having said that, usually what we observed is local language posters will work if your audience is, like for an RTE campaign, we are targeting parents in low income communities. So for them, it makes sense when you put out posters in Tamil or Hindi. And so the context of the audience is very important when you are, trying to create local language posters. Yeah, so that's my input. Yeah.
Thanks, Neha. Thanks, Pooja. Uh, Another question I wanted to ask you, Meghna, was that do you have any recommended word limits on all the collaterals that we create? That ideally annual reports should be, or is this something that NGOs should decide on their own? But I feel like sometimes people create these large reports, but nobody actually reads them because they're 100 pages or more, and because we want to make it more easy to read, visually pleasing, we add a lot of extra pages. Any suggestions on that you may follow on word limits, like if it's a social media post, stick to this much and like that?
Yeah, on reports, annual reports, etc., I don't think there needs to be a page limit. You can have as many pages as you want. I think the limit should be the amount of info per page. That's a really important one. So I would rather have somebody do 8 pages of small paragraphs per page with a little bit of open space, breathing space, a little bit of photography or iconography, then pack all of that information in in 2 pages. Because then immediately when I see a lot of text, I will tend to skip it. But if it's an easy scroll for me, then I don't really keep count of how many pages it's ended up being. So I will just then quickly go by it. So it's more about how much content I'm putting per page. The other thing that I would always say is now we're in a world where a lot of people are accessing all of these, even reports, on the phone. So, to make those reports sort of mobile friendly is another really important aspect to keep in mind when designing it. And it's possible to have full reports on a phone.
Right. Understand. Yeah, thanks. There's one question that somebody said that although you take consent for only using it on annual reports, but funders or your maybe stakeholders may post it on social media, may use it very differently. How do you deal with that? Or is it okay if people other than you do that?
No, it's ideally not okay. Funders, whenever they're using your assets, should ask you for it. You should try and establish that from the beginning, always. If they're using it and it has come to your attention, then you should flag it, not disrespectfully, but just be like, thank you so much for sharing this. We're so happy that you are sharing our work and so excited, but we haven't got consent for this. Can you instead use this and share something that has consent? Or the other way to do it is literally when you're getting consent, don't get consent just for that report. Say, we would like this for our general communications, and you've got that consent. But I don't think just because funders have picked up on something that they have the right to really use it.
Right.
The key thing to remember there is, if you are flagging it to a funder, have an alternate so that they can swap out. Otherwise, don't leave them with a no, you can't use, but then they don't know what to do, because you don't want to miss that opportunity as well.
Yeah. Yes. San, because I've also spoken about recruitment in the talk, Meghna, if you could also share ideas on, so when we are launching, like a lot of organizations, when they're launching a recruitment campaign, they're very clueless on what all should they post, or how in advance should they start posting. So if my application's open, say in July, should I launch it on July, like within July only, a month in advance? How frequently should I post? I know that this is a topic for a different session altogether, but if you could briefly share some insights on this is what works, and this is what you can post. Like, other than you will get to do this, you will get to do that. What else can you post?
Yeah, that's where I feel, so I'm not going to get into the recruitment campaigning, because that's a different thing. And I genuinely think different people some people look at a year in advance, some people look at a quarter in advance. It really depends on what your model, your volunteering model is, and how many people you're looking at, and what's the commitment you're looking at. If you're looking at somebody to come in and paint a house, it's very different from committing to a monthly in-person mentoring, for example. So that I cannot comment on when you should start communicating. But the relevant part to this session is, it's not just about the messaging, the campaign messaging. The stories are going to play a really, really important role in this campaign itself. So the stories are not necessarily the campaign. The campaign is, we've got is the campaign, that this is the volunteering position. The stories should come in at a very frequent level and at all levels through the duration of the campaign. So if you've chosen the campaign to be 6 months, through the whole duration, it needs to be interspersed with stories, and different stories that represent. So let's say you have a total of 10 stories over the course of 5 months. I, as Meghna, who is a potential volunteer, should be able to connect with one of those 10 people, saying, oh, this person is like me. So make sure when you've got the stories, so over the course, I know these are the type of people who are coming, and these are people like me, so I can do this.
Yes, I will ask my last question and then we can close. I know that we planned it for an hour. Is that we spoke about archiving, and we spoke about pre-research. What do you think are some interesting tools to capture these stories? Like, if I go into an interview or a conversation, I like to share a lot of things as an email because I don't want to draft it a lot. But people would prefer at a Google document. Do you think there are anything else other than a Google document, how you can capture, where you can put images and everything?
Yeah, I mean, if people use it, should not be any new technology that you're bringing in, because then the adoption of that across the team is going to be very low. So if people in the org, if you all are using Google already to share documents, etc., stick to Google, but create one folder where which is your stories folder, where you've got it nicely labeled according to perhaps the regions, let's say you're in 5 regions, and you've got 5 regions ka folders, usme then you've got, and have a system, like literally a guide. We go into the detail of writing for every file that we share at Studio Subu. We write the location underscore name underscore date, and keep that as a system. So whatever system works, but that system needs to be across. So use Google File for that. Some people, I know there are organizations that I've worked with where they share stories on Slack because they are used to using Slack. So there is a channel on Slack which is called Stories/Inspiration, where everybody puts their stories and their pictures. But even there, then somebody is responsible for storing all of those. So I think it really is a system that you create on existing software that the team uses for their other work. That should be repeated here.
Right. Thanks. I have one more question. Sorry, I know I said it's the last question, but I just thought of one. When we're doing something for the first time, right? Like if you're launching a new program, if you're sharing something that's brand new, we may not have pictures of our own communities, our own pictures. And if you Google, or if you want to buy, like if you want to use free images, they're mostly not Indian images. And that does impact the connection the people have with it. Is there any tip that you have for that? On where can you
that
source
also goes
images?
into another session, which is a photography session, but I'll do a quick answer of that. I am very against stock photography, but if you need to use stock photography, there is iStock, and there's one more which I can't remember, 1 or 2 more. I'll try to remember them and send you the link, where you can purchase stock photos. The free ones are usually not great and should have all those watermarks and all. But the other way to do it is illustrations that can replace stories, especially if there are sensitive stories where you don't want to show faces, etc. One final tip I'll leave on the photo aspect to this group is, if you all have smartphones like iPhones or any of these smartphones, the kind of photographs that you can capture just using your phones is superbly powerful. A lot of the photographs that we've used for our clients for their actual final reports have been photos that we shot through our phone and not through fancy digital cameras. You just need to know how to use your phone, which goes into a whole nother session. I'm happy to do another session on photography, but it's really, really easy to go and capture on your phone if you just have the guidelines to be able to do that.
Right. Thanks a lot, Meghna. I have put a feedback form for everybody in case you want us to bring up another session with Studio Subu on photography, on recruitment, anything, please put that in the chat or in the feedback form. This has been lovely, Meghna. And if people have more questions, I'm happy to connect them to you directly. Thanks a lot.
Most welcome. And I'm happy to share my email ID if anybody needs it. I can put that here on the chat, or please direct them through Megha as well if you would like to reach through her.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for staying back.